Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here and for being online. My name's Taylor Campy. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Estacada, and this is the fourth and final stakeholder group meeting for the Estacada Transportation System Plan, or TSP, update. And before we get started, just reminders, housekeeping, the restroom is down the hall over here. There's a water cooler in the back if you're thirsty. Yeah, do we want to do a round of, oh, and does everyone have a paper copy of the updated October version in front of them here in the room? If you don't, raise your hand and we'll get one to you. Okay, great. I think I'll go ahead and hand it over to John Bosket with DKS.
All right, did you want to start with the customary round of introductions?
Oh, yeah. And I already introduced myself, so I'll just turn this over to you.
So John Dolezal, the Traffic and Public Safety Committee.
Jim Moriarty, Traffic and Public Safety.
Kerry Dobbs, Traffic and Public Safety.
Ryan Carpenter, Superintendent, Estacada Schools.
Luke Spencer, Clackamas River Outfitters.
Ben Wheeler, Estacada School Board and Planning Commission Chair.
Muna Rustam, Program Administrator for Sandy Transit.
Paul Strobel, local business owner and city council.
Denise Carey, Infrastructure Committee.
Melanie Wagner, City Manager. And being a good example, because we all have to speak into the microphone, or they cannot hear us. So I don't think this is even working. It's not. Here. Now, can you hear me? Okay. Melanie Wagner, City Manager, and we're all going to try really hard to speak into the mic so that you guys can hear us online.
Donald DeRoja, Public Works Director.
And I'm John Bosket with DKS Associates. I'm the project manager for the consultant team helping the city with the TSP update.
And let's hear from folks online. Alan, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Alan Wilson, Senior Planner for City of Estacada.
And maybe everyone could just call out a name of the next person to introduce themselves. How about?
I will popcorn to Kelly.
Hi, Kelly Reed, Department of Land Conservation and Development. Over to Grant.
Hi, Grant O'Connell, Senior Planner at TriMet.
Elena Turpin, the Assistant City Manager for the City of Estacada. Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Poet. I am the Fire Marshal with Estacada Rural Fire District. Ryan, did he already go?
I don't think we've heard from Ryan online yet. Ryan, can you hear us? You're muted if. Okay, let's pop over to Tara.
Tara Perkins, Planning Commission. Oops, over to Beth.
Beth Munns, representative from Portland General Electric, and I believe Anne.
Hi, I'm Ann Schweitzer Johnson. I'm with Todos Juntos, a nonprofit here in Estacada, and partnering with the schools and the libraries. I am on my phone, so I can't see who else hasn't checked in yet. So maybe you can help me with that.
Yeah, Charity.
Hi, Charity Hughes, Estacada City Council, and I believe it's just Ryan that is left.
Okay, Ryan, feel free to unmute and say hi. I hope you can hear us. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think that was everyone. Thank you.
All right, if you've got an agenda here, you probably pull up the PowerPoint and maybe go to the second slide. So as Taylor mentioned, this is the fourth and final stakeholder group meeting. So you're a couple hours away of working your way through your commitment here. So really the purpose of this meeting being our last meeting before we kind of head into the adoption hearings. It's really giving you an overview of the draft TSP, which is really kind of the compilation of all of the work that we've done to date. And, giving us the feedback that we need to make any last refinements before we bring this to the Planning Commission and City Council. So there are still time to make some revisions, and we have made some since the last time we came before you and went over this material. And that's part of what we're going to show you today as well. A lot of the kind of the key changes we've made, but if there are more, that's what we want to figure out, because our objective is to be able to go to Planning Commission and City Council and tell them that this is a stakeholder group approved. And so that's where we need to get. So key things we'll be covering today, just a quick update on the project and kind of where we are at and what's left. Little overview of some of the feedback that we got from the community, and then we'll get into the draft TSP document, including an overview of some of the key changes we made in response to some of the feedback that we've got. And then we'll wrap it up with some time for any questions from the public attendees and reminder of our next steps. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's a slightly updated version of the project schedule there. We're way down at the far right end there. So we've really gotten through all of our community outreach other than just the adoption hearings. And of course, that happened after we met with you last time, which was the S circle right under the evaluate box in the spring. We had our last community workshop and had a briefing with City Council as well. And then that was where we got all the feedback, made revisions, put it into this draft transportation system plan. And then we did have a meeting last week with the DEI committee just to check in, talk about just the outreach process that we conducted with, using a lot of their guidance, and some of the maybe specific outcomes in the TSP that would support the equity goals. And of course, we have our meeting today. And then as I'll get into next, I've got dates, I think, on the last slide on the Planning Commission City Council briefing that we're doing next week. And then I believe it's the 15th of November is what we're scheduled for Planning Commission to start the public hearings process. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So getting right into the community outreach, the second round of outreach that we did in the spring. Again, it was kind of a similar approach to the first round with maybe some slight modifications based on kind of what worked well and maybe what didn't the first time around, but we used a number of different ways to try to inform people and get them engaged. We sent out fact sheets and obviously used the project website that we've been using the whole time, and social media posts through the city's Facebook and Instagram. We did have a city council briefing that I mentioned, and the DEI committee briefing that I think preceded the last stakeholder group meeting. There was the open house that we held here in this room, as well as an online version of that with survey that was open for at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. I can't remember offhand now. That was open for a while. The same day that we did the open house, we actually did some canvassing and a tabling at a What's Up Estacada event. So the What's Up Estacada event was held at the library, and so we just had some folks up there to kind of hang out, intercept people, let them know about the TSP, how to provide comments, as well as then in between that in the open house. They were actually kind of downtown, just kind of walking the streets, going to the stores, handing out the fact sheets, talking to people, just as another way to try to reach out to people and get them engaged. Next slide. And then as far as just kind of a breakdown of at least the written responses that we got, most of the people that we heard from obviously live near within Estacada. Most said they traveled by car predominantly. Almost all of the survey respondents were white, English speaking, and over the age of 25. Half of the respondents who did report their income made over $100,000 annually. And canvassing downtown respondents were mostly white, English speaking, and lower income minimum wage employees or low income residential units. And the next slide, please. And kind of a breakdown, a summary of what we heard. And, you know, guys say, you know, going through the open-ended comments, there are a lot of, I noticed a lot of comments where you get one comment about something and then the exact opposite feeling about that same thing, kind of mirroring it. And I think that happened several times. But generally, I'd say, you know, there were a lot of folks that wanted alternatives to the highway for local travel. Wanting a more connective travel that included safe options for people walking and biking, but not at the expense of motor vehicle traffic. Improving evacuation procedures, land use planning, and I think that land use planning comment was really around just concern about the rapid growth, responding to that, and trying to retain the kind of the small town character at the same time. Is kind of the way I would paraphrase that. Yep, and just as I said, they're accommodating new traffic with the community's continued growth. That's definitely something we've heard several times. And then we did have a couple comments about probably some. Oh, thank you. A couple comments about concerns about the city not listening with previous projects or input opportunities, which seem to be related to the downtown. So noted they were hesitant to provide feedback now. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Before I transition to the draft TSP and how we responded to comments, I just want to kind of pause, see if there are any questions or comments about what I've covered so far. Then I will keep rolling. So the draft TSP, let me get mine up in front of me too here. Most of this again should be very familiar if you got a chance to go through it, because it really is largely made up of all of the memos that we went over through the last, you know, whatever, 14, 16 months of the project. So kind of specifically showing you where all of those memos went. So the goals and objectives memo that we did a long time ago, and the TSP conditions and gaps memo, which is really talking a lot about, you know, kind of what works well or what doesn't today, as well as, you know, 20 years into the future, if we forecast more growth and you don't do any further transportation improvements, you know, what would things look like? The goals and objectives, that's just really directly put right into section 3. So that should have looked very familiar. I don't believe we've changed any of the verbiage, you know, since the last time you saw it. So it should look exactly the same. And then the TSP conditions and gaps memo, that is all contained in section 4. So preceding that, you know, sections 1 and 2, it's really just kind of setting the stage, giving some context in section 1. And then section 2 is just documenting the process that we went through to develop the TSP. And then go ahead and go to the next slide. So I think you meant 2 slides. Go back 1. There you go. So the project alternatives memo, which was the largest of all of the memos. So that was the one where we went over a lot of the cross sections, functional classification, map changes, all of the projects. That kind of got broken up into 3 different areas. So section 5, the standards, That's where you're going to find all the street functional classification, map and changes, all of the typical cross sections for all the streets, which there are a lot of them in your TSP, which is pretty atypical because a few years ago when we did the active transportation plan, we had created and adopted a lot of those specific designs for streets. And so we just carried all of those forward. And then also if you're, planning commissioner, work more on the implementation and there's the things like mobility standards, access spacing standards in there as well. And then the projects are all in section 6. And then the strategies part got broken out into section 8. And so again, that was, and I'll come back to this later, but one thing to note about the strategy section, and that's where we talked about stuff like neighborhood traffic management, resilience, recreational coordination, EV charging, things like that. In the previous memo, those were more of kind of like recommendations, like here's the things the city should do and consider doing. One note here is that's not very helpful in a TSP. You kind of either have to have direction or not. And so we changed those shoulds to the city will do these things. Now, some of them could be, will investigate something further. It's not saying necessarily like for bike share, you will do bike share. I think it was framed as the city will commit to doing a feasibility study to see if that is a viable alternative. So that is something to really pay attention in the strategy section. Whereas, like I said, before it was kind of soft language. Now it's kind of policy statements. You are committing to do some things. So it is good to take note of that. And let's go to the next slide. And then the financially constrained transportation system memo, that is a new one. And we're going to talk about that one a bit too in some later slides. So that's a memo that you had not seen because we developed that after we got all the feedback on the public comments. Because a lot of that one has to do with taking all the responses we got from everybody and identifying priorities as far as the projects go. So we'll come back to that one, but that is all in section 7. And then a quick note, we have a note at the bottom of the table of contents in the TSP about volume 1 versus volume 2. So volume 1 is the only part you're going to adopt. And that's what you see here. That's what's in your hand. Volume 2, we will make also. You don't adopt it. And really all it is it's all the tech memos. It's the meeting summaries, the public meeting, comments that we got. And it's just kind of an archive. So you've got all of that history and background if anybody wanted to go back and dig into that. But you're not adopting that piece. Go ahead and go forward. So we'll get into key changes that we made since the last time we met. And again, this could have been in response to comments we had here in the last time we met with this group. Could have been from the city council briefing that we had. It could have been from the public comments. We just kind of took all of that together and made some revisions. So the first one I wanted to note, and I believe this one did come from this room, we added an interim project. It's A70 if you want to go find it. And it's to do sidewalk infill on the north side of 4th Avenue between Shafford and Oakview. I think that one came up because the project that was in there previously, it was just kind of the whole segment of 4th. And there was an identified need for safe routes to school to address at least that segment sooner than having to kind of build the whole thing out. So we just broke out a piece of that and now it's a separate project. We also add a special cross section, and that's the one that's shown there on the graphic. It's cross section 43. And that is on Main Street right outside here from 3rd to the highway. And it's just matches the project, the current design plans for the project that you're going to construct next year. comment came up recently because we didn't have anything for that identified as special cross section before. Because it wasn't needed for the active transportation plan. Kind of our core routes very diverged off of that. And so I guess the default would be the minor collector, but that's not what you're intending to build here. So we thought we'll just kind of cover our bases. We'll just put that in here. So it's aligned with the TSP. We added project A78. That was in some response to some of the outreach that we did in that second round. We got comments from folks at the Estacada Area Food Bank that they do have people that visit riding bicycles, and sometimes they have a hard time finding parking near the food bank for their bikes. And so it generally just calls for more bike parking in the downtown, but does specifically point out that area kind of as a priority. And then we expanded the definition of the Broadway Street Greenway project, which is A41, to better define the street right of way. I think that might have come up in this room also. So that was there was already a kind of a safe routes to school Greenway project on Broadway. And as you probably know, there's the area where it's kind of undefined. You can't quite tell if it's parking lot or street. We just kind of added to that project and clarified. So as part of that, to make sure to address the delineation between the two and make that more clear. Any questions or comments on those before I move to the next slide? Do those sound familiar? Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, so slight change, the neighborhood local streets on that that special cross, or actually it's one of the standard cross sections. If you recall, we had a local street standard cross section, and then the neighborhood local street is kind of the skinny street. It's the 28 foot, curb to curb one. We got a lot of responses from folks. It's a conversation like we had at the city council briefing about wanting more limitations on where that should or shouldn't be applied. So it couldn't just be a default, for any developer that wanted to try to choose that. And so through discussion with them about what they felt was an appropriate limitation, we changed the recommended average daily traffic on the street. So we lowered it quite a bit to be 125 trips a day, which is, roughly equivalent to 10 to 15 single family homes on that street would kind of be. So if there were more, if the streets were serving more than that, according to that guidance, that might not be the best choice.
And that would be neighborhood local street would have to jump up to local street typical cross section.
After that point, yes. Yeah.
So it's just essentially adding, well, different sidewalks, but another parking lane is a big driver.
Yeah, let me find my cross section here.
Like page 35 and 36, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Page 35 shows the typical local street. So that's two 10-foot drive lanes and then two 8-foot parking aisles. That goes down to two 10-foot drive lanes, parking only on one side. It's still 8 feet. You just don't have parking on both sides. Another key difference is there's no landscape strip. So on the local street, if you're seeing that, you've got a 5-foot landscape strip and then a 5-foot sidewalk. So there's more buffer for people walking, room for street signs, light posts, whatever things can go in that planter strip. Whereas on the neighborhood local street, the whole thing is more compact. So it's just a 6-foot sidewalk next to the street. So the whole thing is pretty minimal.
So what was that formula you mentioned earlier, like 15 homes equals so many one-way trips or something like that?
Average daily trips. I mean, it's approximate. I think a single family home is somewhere around 10 trips a day, maybe a little bit more than that.
So it's 10 per 15 homes, or is it 10 per home?
Per home.
So 15 single homes would be 150 trips. Okay.
Roughly, yeah, roughly. So it's kind of a back of the envelope number.
It looks like it's noted on page 36 in that bottom of that first paragraph. Is that the right calculation?
Yep.
125 vehicles per day.
Right. So we just put that in there for guidance. So it's like I said, if it looks like, that's the range you'll be in, that or less, that's a better option. If it's more, you may want to go back to the local street design. And that was kind of, I think when we were talking through that with city council, I kind of threw a number of single family homes on that street out. I kind of got that response back from them about what seemed like about right. So we kind of fit that ADT according to that conversation.
Yeah, and can I jump in for a second? So the way that ends up working is, for example, if we get an application from someone who wants to develop their property with a subdivision of homes, and they're proposing some streets throughout the subdivision, we have to look at their proposed streets and say, do these match up with what the TSP says those streets are supposed to look like? And so if they're proposing to put one of these skinny neighborhood local streets in a place where it would be serving, 60 homes, that would raise a red flag, because we would look in the TSP and say, oh, this type of street cross section is only supposed to be for roughly 10 homes. Maybe if they were proposing to serve 15 or even 16 homes, then the council could say, all right, we'll be a little flexible on it because it's close enough. But that's where that guidance will come in. That's one example of where that guidance will come in and help the city determine what to allow to get built or require to get built.
So, and if there's a better time for this answer, let me know. But on page 3, when it's talking about city funding programs and the transportation system development charges, says there's a rate, one-time fee of 344.83 per equivalent length new daily trip. Does that mean, and how I read that means that if you put a new home in a new development, and there's 10 daily trips per house, that would be 10 times 344 for that house, for that transportation fee?
Roughly, I mean, yeah, ballpark, I'll say, because, the number I threw out there was back of the envelope, the actual trip
Well, just,
conversion
yeah,
rate. Yeah, the
doesn't need
city
to be
may use
exact.
may be different, but yeah, that's probably close.
And so I didn't do the math. 344 times, so what, $3,400. So it's say $3,500 a home. Is that right? Math?
I don't calculate these. Where's Brian? I'm not sure, but that sounds roughly correct. The SDCs that get charged on new homes are a really significant,
Okay.
end up being a really significant number. Transportation is not the only one that gets charged. And I'm happy not to be the one that processes those, so I can't say for sure. But I think that's how that works.
Let's see, I'll move on here. Lawrence Road, we just made a revision to that project to upgrade Lawrence Road. Like that might have been through the city council. I can't remember what room we were in at the time, but just a question came up if that included fixing the hairpin turn, which we had not. So we went and jacked the cost up significantly and assumed that hairpin turn would be straightened out. So that was an adjustment we made to that. We brought back the current curve for the intersection right outside the window here at the highway and Main Street. And that was something we discussed, I think last time in this room. Previously, the previous recommendation, which is actually still in there, but now it's left as an interim project. So you've got both in there. And previously it was leave that as is, but do some changes kind of from an access management standpoint to the intersection at Jeremy Lovelace where it comes into Main Street. You could look at different options, whether that's one way in one direction, not allowing left turns out, just something to eliminate some of the turning conflicts in that small area. So that is still there as an interim safety improvement, but now we've brought back the longer term plan or proposal that was from the downtown and Riverside area plan. And that would, as you see in the graphic there, that would just realign Main Street over a little less than a block. And that may give you enough separation between the existing signal at Broadway and, signal or roundabout, whatever the future holds for the 211, 224 split down here, to potentially put in a traffic signal if you got to that point in the future. That was one of the challenges with doing something like that in the existing spot, is it's so close to Broadway that's really difficult to effectively do. So that is back in the plan.
And John, that was okay with the fire department?
That is, yeah, that was what I heard.
So where would they come in at? Where would the fire department, where would the fire trucks hit that road? Because now they come out, it's kind of right in the middle of the front of their place.
I think Sarah's on the call.
Oh,
Sarah Poet, feel free to speak up. I can't remember if you were in the room or on the Zoom the last time we talked about
I
this.
was not on the Zoom the last time, but I do see in the plan where they have, and correct me if I'm wrong, looks like you're gonna put a traffic signal in there at the highway. Is that correct?
That could be part of the future improvement there. It kind of depends on how much growth there is in the future, but that is possible.
Yeah, so I saw that. I know that the fire department's looking at building a new fire station, so where the current one is sitting will be moved over. And so there'll be some restructuring there on that lot. So I don't think for the future, I think we're able to be a little bit more flexible with how we're going to approach that based on our upcoming design criteria on our property here. So we can make that work.
okay. I was just wondering, because when when 3:30 hits, the buses will be lined up clear back behind where the fire trucks will be trying to get out. So just checking.
Where's the main conflict? Is it because they're too close to the traffic light here or too close to the 211 bridge?
For us to get out, it's typically the 211 bridge kind of blocks that intersection for us to be able to get out. So that's where our concern is. And
what about the bigger picture, fire department aside, just
The light, the ODOT wouldn't let us have a light this close to get out. Like, we couldn't put a light where Main Street is now because it's too close to that light. So if we move it down, we're hoping that they will allow a light at that point.
can we get rid of that light and put a light here?
Well, we talked about that, but
And what was the answer?
I don't know. I don't know what the council answer was. I know infrastructure talked about it, but
I just remember this conversation, what was it, 10 or 15 years ago? And it was like pitchforks and torches. And it was not good.
for that, yeah.
Yeah, for this
It
very
wasn't.
picture.
Yeah, we do have another project that may be an interim project, depends on the timing of that. And if the current curve there happens, but it's project S2 under the safety category to put in a emergency signal at the Curran Street intersection to help the fire trucks get out.
That would be good, I think.
And that's what I thought I saw in the plan. And that would help alleviate some of that. And then I also saw a future possibility of a roundabout down at the 211, 224 junction, which would also help. So those two alone would really improve our ability in response.
So what does that do to the current curve then? Is that something that we want to keep on there? What would be the purpose for keeping it on if we've got some alternatives that seem to work as well, pretty well too?
I'd keep it in there. I mean, timing is one thing. I can't tell you when you'll get the funds to do any one of these, and they're going to cost different amounts of money. And if you did the current curve, again, let's say you built it in 5 years. I don't know that in 5 years, ODOT's going to look at how much traffic is trying to get, in and out of there. And it's possible they might tell you, you're not ready for a traffic signal. We want to wait longer for more growth. Then you'd want to get the emergency signal in there probably right away. But obviously, if you were at the point where you could get the approval for the signal, then yeah, you probably don't need the emergency signal anymore. You can just ignore that one and move forward.
And something you said earlier, I think is a good point. I think it would apply to this as well too, that if we put it in there, that doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it means we could be doing a feasibility study to consider it at some point. Is that a good clarification?
For any of these projects?
Yeah.
Well,
or for the big one like this specifically.
Yeah, and I think usually the biggest limiting factor with any of these projects in the TSP, it comes down to funding, right? Because there's really no way you're going to end up paying for all of these. So it's funding will be limited, and so you're always going to be prioritizing and maybe exploring different funding opportunities, looking for grants, partnerships with ODOT to fund something like that. So it's a little bit hard to say which ones will get done and which won't. So that's usually the bigger factor.
Okay.
Last one on this slide, we added, I believe, this was in the resiliency strategy section. We just added direction to coordinate with ODOT to request CCTV and weather stations in the Estacada area. Because I believe right now, and if you ever use ODOT Trip Check, there's not a lot, at least in this area. I think it kind of ends more up on maybe 211 in the Clackamas area. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And let's see, we added Project T4 to provide support for area transportation assistance programs. So this is one of the first comments we got in the project was just about, I think specifically this is in reference to the ride assistance program that the community center has for folks, whether they're in the city or surrounding areas to get to, medical appointments, shopping, whatever. And I know the county has a similar program, transportation reaching people, and it sounds like the biggest barrier in both of those, where demand is exceeding their capacity to serve it, is just having enough volunteers to help run the service. And so we just put a kind of a project placeholder in there for the city to help in some way, whether that's through advertising or through providing incentives to get more volunteers. Whatever way seems to be the most effective, just to help support that a bit better, either program. We changed Farmstead Road back to a local street. So that was a minor collector before. And we did include a note. Really, the issue there was if the area, the UGB expands in that area, that makes more sense. For now, it's probably not needed given where the growth's expected and where the UGB is. So there's a note in there also just to acknowledge that may make sense to reclassify that as a minor collector should the urban growth boundary continue to expand in that area. And then we updated the minor collectors in the north end of the city. I'll resist going up there and pointing because the people on the camera won't see it. But basically it's if you know where Sweetwater is, it's maybe you can kind of see now, we colored that in yellow now. So a little bit of adjustments had been done with the development in the old TSP, and in the earlier version of the work we were doing, we had a future minor collector going north-south closer to Eagle Creek Road. So that's been replaced with Sweetwater, which has already been built. That was the biggest change there.
One of my things, just an overall note on the thing, is to maybe have the same thing but with updated maps, because until you get to the very last map on page 51, it doesn't show any of the newer subdivisions for the last couple of years. Like the Deuce Road subdivision doesn't show up on any of these, or so maybe using a more updated map.
Yeah, we had that conversation. The pace of development has outstripped the updating of the GIS files.
Side note, it won't be done in time for the adoption of this project, but we staff internally are working on developing our own GIS, which is just a mapping system. For a long time, and still we were reliant on Clackamas County for all of our mapping needs. And one of the things that we're going to do when we have our system up and running is we're going to build out a map, a series of layers, what have you, to capture all of the cross sections and standards and projects that end up getting adopted in the TSP. That will have more updated data showing all the new subdivisions, and eventually that'll be publicly viewable. And it'll also help us staff conduct our development review. So that updated map will exist. It just might not be another year or so.
On page 51, figure 46 actually has the updated map. That's why I thought it was strange that the other ones didn't, because that one actually does include the current, most of the current things, but anyway. Just a suggestion.
Right, and last one on here, we made an adjustment to the minor collector typical cross section. So that's back on back to your cross sections. Page 34. And that was in response to conversations we had at the city council briefing. So the biggest change there was, I believe we were trying to keep the cross section within 60 feet when we were doing our adjustments, because that's what largely all of your street rights of way are currently. So we just wanted to kind of be consistent with that. In doing so, to get everything to fit, we had a 7-foot parking lane. And so through the conversation, we decided there was really a lot of pushing to get an 8-foot parking lane in there. It was really hard to do without really compromising other things and getting it to fit within 60 feet. So we decided we're just going to expand the typical footprint to 62 feet for new streets that get built. And then we get our 8-foot parking in, we get the full 5-foot planter strips. We kind of get everything that we wanted to have. And then we added notes in here to say where you are stuck with a 60-foot right of way for whatever reason, because that was already predetermined and set, and that's what you've got. We gave some advice on how to adjust that. So that would be reducing the planter strips a little bit, so down to 4.5 feet, and that includes the curb. So they're fairly small planter strips. And then a 5-foot bike lane. If you're looking at the picture here, we've got parking only on one side of the street. So the 5-foot bike lane would go on the opposite side of the parking. So they're not having to deal with that. So that was the adjustment we made to the minor collector standard. And you can go to the next slide. Oh, that was my last key change. So before I move on to the high priority and financial constraint projects, any further questions or comments on revisions we made? Any you were hoping we had made that you didn't hear about?
So, Lawrence Road, right? It looks like it went from a local to a major collector. And then there's 2 projects assigned to it, A27 and C11. But when you look at the map, I didn't see where it connects with Coupland. And that came up in our last meeting when they were talking about school buses, the difficulty making that turn. And wondering if that could be added, or if it's not part of what's going on already.
So if you were looking at the September version of figure 12, the map showing the street classifications, that was an erroneous, outdated version of figure 12, and it's now been updated in the October version.
Okay.
So I wonder if
I'm not worried about that part. It's the intersection itself is real tiny. I mean, buses can't make it without doing contortions to make that turn. And just looking at the map, you know, if people are gonna want to take their kids to school or the buses are going that way. And it can't hack the traffic right now. And if the part that has been changed to the whatever type of collector it was, major collector, that intersection isn't gonna handle it.
Yeah, we didn't look at that intersection for like capacity improvements. It might just because it's on the edge of the urbanized area. Now, if Copeland and Lawrence get improved to the major collector standard, which is the intent, that should, you know, that would build them out right to be urban streets and not the small rural streets. So that should fix the tight turning issues, right? You'd have an opportunity to fix your geometric problems at the intersection. The only thing that there isn't anything to address is I don't know if there's any like, you know, long delay problems, which right now, a lot of that area is not urbanized. So I'm guessing you're not seeing anything like that on a consistent basis. It might be more geometric problems, just trying to make the turns.
You know, with this growth, I think it probably changes every week. I still can't believe I can drive from Deuce all the way over to Copeland through all that stuff. It's amazing. So my understanding was that there has been an ongoing issue with the bus having to either stop traffic or something like that, because there's more traffic. And then maybe some damage to some of the what's that stuff called for drainage and culverts.
It sounds like those are the kinds of things that would get fixed if you just built Copeland and Lawrence to an urban standard.
Sure.
I thought the places they were talking about this, I thought the places they talked about with the school bus was at that big, that where you go down the hill and around that sharp corner. I thought that was where the issues the school buses were having. Was it at the actual intersection
This is
too?
probably new because Lawrence, well, our school bus is actually from the new neighborhoods coming down Lawrence now.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Are they?
Yes.
And so that's
Wow.
new.
Making a right on Lawrence there.
Yeah.
And that was the issue.
The issue there is, it's like a 90-degree turn. We videoed a school bus trying to make that corner. He can't turn right unless there's no vehicle in the oncoming lane. So to turn right, he has to swing wide into the opposing lane. If there's traffic there, he has to stops up everybody on Copeland to make a right turn. So he has to wait for everybody to get out of the way in the opposing lane on that corner on the opposite side. If he does turn, he swings out into the opposing lane coming the opposite way, which would be east, heading east. So one school bus or one tandem truck with rock or whatever construction does the same thing every day. And what happens is the culvert that's sticking out about 8 feet now is broken off because of the sharp right turn. So the monument pin is back about another 15 feet from the culvert. The same answer to the question works up on Deuce and Curran. They have a 14-foot sweep so that when you're driving west on Copeland, you're able to turn the corner without imposing the other lane. And so once again, it's just a sharp right turn and everybody plugs up there. And I noticed that in the package, it's pretty big bucks to get that whole thing to become a major collector there. But this is happening right now. I mean, this is tomorrow morning. So it's just to say it's happening now.
So are you suggesting or that we should prioritize some changes on Copeland then to allow for that turn onto Lawrence? And maybe that's something that we're missing in here. Sure, we've got it as a major collector proposal, but is there something that could be done in the interim before we get to that?
Right, and then he had mentioned that this is county, where it's just half the roads in the growth boundary, the other half isn't.
On Lawrence, yeah.
On Lawrence.
Yeah, so the city doesn't have any the county has all that jurisdiction. The city has no jurisdiction on those roads.
The city will, I think how it'll work whenever the property and roadway, half of the roadway gets annexed. It becomes city jurisdiction, at which point and then as those properties decide to develop, we would require them to build out the half street to a major collector standard. And part of the reason that we did that was we recognize we probably cannot rely on the county to build out the street in response to our urban development. But we can at least get the pavement width of a local street. If we accomplish, we can accomplish that by requiring half of a major collector roughly to get built out on our side of the street. So that's part of the reason that we upgraded that, bumped that up to major collector. But yeah, unless we adopted a specific project for the city to go in and upgrade that street, it won't get updated until upgraded until an adjacent development comes in. And then we would require the developer, the private party, to build out the street frontage that's next to their property.
So how would you reroute the school bus? How do you fix this? Isn't that, we're kind of on the fixing end of things?
There's how do you fix it in the TSP? But the other question is, how do you get it actually fixed in the near term?
Yeah.
Yeah, and my guess, based on what I'm hearing, at least for the TSP, is, well, theoretically, we have it addressed by projects to urbanize those streets. Maybe there's a more urgent need and we need to break out a separate project to just accelerate fixing the geometric problem at that intersection. I'm seeing a lot of nods. No, I think what it comes down to probably is, I don't know if anyone from the county was on the call. I mean, part of it's funding, right? And my guess is jurisdiction is one issue, but it's who you expect to pay for it is the other, right? So if it's the counties and you thought you're going to wait for the county to pay for it, it's probably not going to be a priority, or at least at the same level it is for them. That might not work for you. So it's figuring out how you're going to fund it is one thing. And I imagine if you came forward with the funding, that makes it probably move forward a lot easier, right? Whether it's yours or not.
Ryan, this isn't a new problem, right? Because there were buses going up and down Lawrence before those things went in, right?
That's correct.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
just we've been driving on that road
Yeah.
and turning onto that turn for as
Yeah.
long as I know and can remember. But the increased traffic certainly brings more attention to that turn. If I could segue to a question or an observation, two questions. I noticed that the designation of River Mill Road to Eagle Creek Road is constituted as a major collector. And I was just curious, as we anticipate that being the area where the growth continues to occur, as you look at the population studies and the new downtown or the old lumber mill property. I know that there's a plan that exists with that as well. I guess my first question was, I was surprised to see so little mentioned about that particular intersection and its patterns, particularly based on the fact that the traffic designation was designated as congested just the same as it was in Broadway and Main Street. So I was curious if there were different conversations about that, as I would anticipate in the long-term safety plan, that being like the next most busy intersection that's going to occur here probably within the next 5 years.
The
And then-
intersection of River Mill and the highway, or Eagle Creek?
Eagle
Road?
Creek
Eagle
Road.
Creek Road. Okay.
Yep. And then my second part of that particular question is, I look at the diagrams and I'm a novice when it comes to this profession. But these look like roads, all are roads to me. I was just curious if there is a diagram for major collectors connecting with major collectors, and if there's an intersection diagram that exists when it comes to that, because it's one thing to have this be a road where not other roads come into each other. I was just curious what intersections could potentially look like when major collectors meet major collectors and when minor collectors meet major collectors was just the question I had.
To your first question, I know we have a project at River Mill and Eagle Creek in here, and actually that's, Taylor can speak more to that, but I think that one's coming sooner than later. Maybe,
We'll see. The
depends on development. But
Yeah. It's possible, there was a recent subdivision approval where the agreement was for the developer to build out that intersection with the traffic signal. And I think the development, the development approval is being sold to a different developer. So the approval and its requirements, its conditions of approval still stand. So if they move forward, then they'll be required to build that traffic signal at that intersection. But if they don't, then no development will happen there, and the city could choose to build the project ourselves because it is in our SDC at this time already.
Okay. And the approved intersection that was sold to the current developer, that constituted whatever the minimums were for a major collector connecting to another major collector, which I would assume a traffic light would be an example of that. But a right-hand turn lane, a left-hand turn lane,
Yeah, I would have to go back and look at the specifics, but we coordinated all that with the city engineer.
Okay.
And those designations already existed in our TSP at that time. So that would have been what we were looking at already for that intersection.
as far as, number of like turn lanes you have at intersections of, well, whatever, collectors and whatnot. Typically at the TSP level, you don't address that. And part of the reason is you don't know when all of these projects are going to go forward. So some of these could be 5, 10, 15, 20 years away. And as any of these projects advance, they go through their engineering design phase. And at that point, they get more updated information about traffic patterns and demands, and they figure those details out at that point. So with a rare exception, like I think at Cemetery and Coupland, we identified putting in a left turn lane, but that was just to address kind of a safety sight distance issue. But in general, we don't get down to turn lanes at the intersections, at least not in the TSP.
Okay, so and this is for my final clarification, and so I can better understand this. We do care about lanes and how many lanes there are in parking spots when we talk about roads, but we don't care when we talk about intersections. Is that what you said? In the TSP?
Yeah, because the TSP is a bit of a higher level. We're just trying to set the framework.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, the right of way widths, typically how many lanes you would have on a typical section of a road. We identify that. But yeah, more detail needs to be figured out at some of those intersections at the time that, development comes in or you get the funding, you kind of sharpen the pencil.
Thank you.
Ryan, on page 83, on the high priority intersection improvement project list, it's the number 1. Eagle Creek Road and River Mill Road is the number 1 intersection.
Okay.
Project.
Great, I
there,
didn't see
so,
that. Okay.
yeah.
I have a question going back to Copeland Road. I call it Copeland, but I've been here a long time. 10 years ago, we had a customer, person within the city limits asked to build a pole barn that is on the downhill side of Copeland Road. And the pole barn was valued at $56,000 or whatever the number was, but it was above the threshold that required them to do sidewalk and road improvements to Copeland Road to the tune of millions of dollars. So as we look at the major collector cross section that's 60 feet wide, currently the pavement on Copeland's 24 feet wide. Where are we coming up with that other footage? And is the $13 million in our project list on A25 going to account for retaining walls along that length? Or does it even matter for this conversation? But and then I'll go back and say it does matter to this conversation, because as the next person wants to build a pole barn on their rural property adjacent to Copeland Road, and then we adopt this, are they going to have to build a bike lane, a 2-foot median between the bike lane and the drive lane, landscape strips, sidewalks? Because that was, when we got into that back then, there was the city standard, and then there's the intent of the city standard. And I think that's what we ultimately went back on, was that while the city standard is you have to do this, the intent of it is not to tax you with a 200-foot retaining wall and sidewalks on your only section of Copeland Road. Sorry, that's a lot. I remember it very vividly. I drive by it every day.
Yeah, I will say, generally speaking, that the typical cross sections are typical, right? In an ideal setting, that's what you want to build. And to the degree you can and it's feasible, you should always be striving to do that. Inevitably, you will come across circumstances, whether it's a sheer slope, right? You need to build a massive retaining, something that just doesn't make it feasible to do, whether it's an environmental issue, whether it's a cost issue. That's why we provide the alternative minimum widths in the tables to help navigate that. So if you just can't get 60 feet of right of way without, just blowing the budget through the roof, there's options to reduce some of the widths on those things to hopefully get to something that still meets the spirit of, that road, the major collector in this case, but will kind of fit the constraints that you've got.
How does that look from an enforcement standpoint? That's probably more of a you question.
Yeah, it would be from a permitting standpoint. And I think the code section that you're referring to for requiring sidewalk, if someone's building a new structure and it costs more than like $25,000, they have to put in curb and sidewalk along the frontage of their property if it's not already there. I think there's a provision in there now, maybe you all put it in after that whole debacle, that allows an exception from that. In the council can approve a variance from that standard requirement if there's if the circumstances warrant it. So there's that. And then but yeah, otherwise generally we're supposed to look at what people are proposing to build and check whether they're building the frontage according to what the TSP and the code says they're supposed to do. So as long as there is as long as there are options like that variance, like we have criteria for a variance in the code that grants you an exception to certain requirements when you have really specific and odd qualities about your property that are out of your control,
okay,
right? That make your property sort of, I don't want to say unfairly, but yeah, significantly harder to develop in ways that someone normally could.
Well, and I like that. The one thing I don't want is to pigeonhole Copeland Road as a 62-foot right of way, and now the county will forever own that because nobody wants to develop it because there's no feasible way to do a 62-foot right of way. And anybody that does their due diligence is going to go, wow, this is totally cost prohibitive, and it's forever going to be kind of haphazardly built road that's scabbed onto the cliff and guardrail on one side. No way to get people up there because we're requiring something that's so off the wall and doesn't apply to this. So as long as there's an avenue or a ability to have for those people to have a conversation and say, this doesn't work, here's what I propose. It might be a 8-foot travel in each direction and a 2-foot walkway. Does this work? And there's a little latitude there. I'm okay with it.
And I can't speak directly to Copeland Road. I looked at a lot of the right of ways in city streets, and 60 is pretty common. So hopefully there's 60 feet there, and this would fit. Now, that said, I know sometimes what got built in reality and where the right of way lines don't always match up. But in theory, I think that 60 feet aligns with maybe what's there.
Okay. Thanks.
Go to the high priority and financially constrained projects. Okay, so this again is in section, what is it, 7? Section 7. So this is stuff you had not seen before. So again, the difference between high priority and financially constrained. So high priority, I'll talk about first. These are, the process of identifying these. First, we use the goals and objectives, and we kind of did some evaluation on how well different projects met the breadth of the goals and objectives. And as you might recall in the project alternatives memo, the thick one we brought before you a while ago, it had the rankings like high, medium, low included. So people could see that as we were presenting these. But then we got feedback from this group, from city council, infrastructure committees, traffic and public safety committee, public outreach, comments, school district, San Diego Metro. Everybody provided comments. We put all that stuff together. We went back and looked at all the projects, kind of made a matrix, and presented that to the city as far as what projects it looked like were the most common ones that people wanted. And through that, we identified in all of these different categories of safety, transit-oriented projects, safe routes to school, street upgrades, and so on. There's a whole bunch of tables in that section 7. We just documented which ones looked like that were most commonly said by the public and all the stakeholders, we want to see these get done. It is not limited by available funding. It's more like your wish list of the highest priority projects. So it's really used more of a reference or a guide for future decision making. But the big difference with, and maybe go to the next slide. The financial constrained project list is a bit different. So this is something you're required to have in your transportation system plan. And the big thing with this is it is restricted by the type and amount of funding that we projected that you would have. So if you remember, we did the transportation forecast memo, and I think we talked about the outcome of that a bit last time. I think the finding of that was that through this planning horizon, we thought you're going to have maybe $9 million to spend. And that was just looking at your current stable revenue streams. If you get grants, that would be in addition to whatever we projected, but grants are, unknown. But also the type of funding can affect this too, because largely that $9 million was coming from systems development charges, which can't just be spent on any type of project. They can't go to fix kind of an existing deficiency. They could only be spent on kind of capacity adding projects or ones to support the growth, right? New development. So that makes it a bit tricky if you simply try to use that and say, well, we'll fund all the high priority projects, because some of those you might not be able to use SDCs for. So what we did in forming that list was we kind of looked at the combination of, well, high priority died my life. There I go. The combination of high priority projects that we thought would align with that funding. So it's, within the $9 million, but also we think we could spend SDCs on those. And then also because, what tends to happen a lot of times, you look at a lot of the projects are those new streets in the north end of the city. Because as that development happens, you're going to have to build the collector streets to serve them and access them. A lot of your SDCs go into helping build those collector streets. So that's probably where a lot of it's going to have to go, just to support the development and get access to it. So that was how we formed that list of projects. So there are some other things to note. And these are, I believe, kind of new requirements on the financially constrained project list. I think just as of last summer, not 2022. One is there is some variance. While you're required to have your financially constrained project list, and it's supposed to align with our projected funding, you can be within 25% of that. So you can be 25% over. Right now, we're under that mark. So I've got, I think, about $610,000 or $630,000 of unused, I guess, capacity in that list. So one of the questions I was going to throw out to that group is, not only do you want to change something on the financially constrained project list, but there is some room to add something else. And maybe it is that that geometric fix, if we think we can pay for that with SDCs, since a lot of new development is going to contribute to that. The other is there didn't used to be restrictions, so you could adopt your financially constrained list, but you still, if an opportunity came up to build a project on your TSP in 7 years that was unforeseen, you could deviate and do that. I think it's a little trickier now in that it says in the OARs that you can only construct projects on your financially constrained list, with the exception if it's built by property owners as part of the development requirement. So you might find that you might have to amend that list or your TSP maybe more often than you did in the past when navigating that. So I think that just there's some important things to keep in mind about the financial constraint list. Not only why is it there and what's it for, but kind of the importance of getting the right projects on there. And usually the way that list comes up, or at least in the past, prior to some of these new restrictions or requirements, was if somebody wants to do a zone change or a comp plan amendment, typically they would have to do a transportation impact analysis. And they get to assume when they're doing their 20-year projection, any projects on the financially constrained list will be there already to help support the development, because theoretically there's an assumption you've committed to fund those. So that's usually where it comes into play. Yes, please.
So in the past, we would update our CIP list when we did our resolution each year for the transportation system SDCs. And because we would be taking things off the list and then putting things on the list, can you do it that way to add things once something gets done on this list? Or does it have to be a more of a formal thing to add something on once you're taking something off?
The TSP gets adopted into our comprehensive plan. So I echo that question. Would it have to be a comprehensive plan amendment?
Right. Because what Kurt has had us do in the past is that we take this list that is in here, and then we take off and add on to at least to calculate the SDCs. But then would we not be able, if you did 2 of these big projects, would you not be able to add on a project in your resolution? Or do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm guessing it would be like a TSP amendment, so like more of a comp plan amendment. Like I said, because that requirement is new, I'm guessing no one has actually had to navigate that. Maybe I can put, I know we had a DLCD rep on the call here. Can we get a ruling? Any advice?
I can certainly follow up with you after I check with our transportation specialist at DLCD. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.
Thank you. So like I said, that's a new requirement. So I really doubt anybody has had to navigate that yet, but it would seem you would have to just amend your TSP, which if it is an extension of your comp plan, then that's what you'd have to do. But we'll find out more. What is my next slide? Okay, let's go back a step. High priority project list and financial constraint list. Again, following this meeting, if you're still digging into that stuff, that's definitely things you'd want to look at. But I don't know if from what you have seen or what you've heard, questions or comments, or are there any projects you think really need to be on that list? Well, either list. And I will say the financial constraint list is trickier. If you think there's a project you want on there, but you're not sure if it would qualify, don't be afraid to just tell us. We'll go back and see if we think it would fit and kind of meet the constraints of that list.
I got one more question.
Yeah.
So, some of these projects that are like $5,000 and $10,000, they aren't gonna be on this high priority list, but just if we had 20,000 each year in our operating budget for maintenance, we could do these projects. They don't have to be on the financially constrained list.
I would certainly think so, because I mean, arguably, there's a lot of those smaller dollar operational projects that a lot of cities wouldn't even put in their TSP because they would assume, like I said, those are operational in nature. We'll just go do them.
So should we look at taking those out? I mean, I'm saying
I
like
don't know.
the
Maybe that could
5,000
be,
for.
maybe that could be part of our DLCD questions and clarifications, because I would hate for you to not be able to do those, because they, like I said, they are operational in nature. Since you know what they are and you know what you want to do, I kind of like having them in there so you can keep track of them. But yeah, if that for whatever reason was going to be a problem, being nimble, right? You couldn't be nimble and get those small things done quickly. Maybe we should take them out.
So
But
maybe she can answer. Okay.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to check on is, you know, that change to the rules was part of the climate friendly and equitable communities rule making. And most of those changes are targeted to just the big metro areas. And so Estacada hasn't been affected by most of those climate friendly rules. So I'm trying to figure out if the changes to section 180 are effective statewide or only for the large metros.
great, thank you. See a question coming.
Yeah, I know. I just, I thought I heard, and again, this comes from my driving those new neighborhoods and all those new streets. My understanding is, I think, is that those streets are paid for out of the system development charge, the fee that the developer pays, which is a set per house or whatever it is. And so, but where I'm going is, what I'd like to know is what percentage of the system development charge fees for all these new developments that are going in go to building just those local streets that aren't on these lists, versus how much the whoever, I don't even know who's paying the bills for building all those new streets. But then when I look at this financially constrained list, which is things that we're supposedly supposed to be able to pay, you know, on our own, a lot of these, it seems like a lot of the projects, we're way ahead of the curve in terms of how fast we're growing versus what the plan set up for through 2043. And so I'm looking at for these financially constrained things, over $10 million to pay for these things. And if we've spent all of that CDC or system development charge money for just putting the streets in over there, there's nothing left unless it comes from us. Is my math wrong? Well, I mean, I don't know the math, but
I see an answer coming.
Yeah, the local streets, so most of the streets that go in the new subdivisions are local streets, and they're covered by, that cost is covered by the developer themselves. A street that's a higher classification that is adopted as a project in our transportation system plan. Sometimes we have added those as projects in our SDC that we've been collecting funds for, and then we can credit the developers for building out that, you know, major collector extension from River Mill Road over to the Faraday Hills. Like I think there were SDC credits that were available to that developer to build out that major collector, but all of the other local streets that will be going in there, the developer bears the cost of those. So those don't come out of the SDC.
Okay.
Yeah, and only part of collectors are typically paid for by SDCs, I think as Taylor was saying.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, and so everybody in the ether hears this, the developers or landowners pay for the streets curb to curb,
Yes.
pavement, everything.
Yes.
And then they further get charged an SDC when they put a house in.
Yes.
So the developers aren't really the bad guys necessarily.
I'm-
Oh wait, that's my word. Sorry.
I make no comment on.
So
Yeah.
but they are paying a fair amount of money, not only building their own streets within their subdivisions, but they're also paying SDCs to help other projects outside of their developments.
Right, yeah, and if their development project happens to be required to put in a bigger thing like a major collector or a big intersection traffic signal, that's what they would get SDC credits for, and so that can either come in the form of reimbursement, or at the time of actual home building, they would just get they would have to pay less in their SDC fees, you know, however it gets calculated out. Great. Kelly?
Hi, thanks. It looks like, based on the applicability section in the Division 12 of the rules, Rule 180 only applies in those large metro areas. So I don't think the financially constrained project list limitations need apply in Estacada. I think you have more flexibility there.
Thank you, Kelly.
That's great.
Yeah,
news.
and if there are, I guess, when you kind of look, I guess when you're going back and like making any sort of revisions, if you have any specific questions about how it does work instead of that rule, like what is the rule that applies, I'm happy to work with you afterwards to get that nailed down.
I have a question now. Can we still take the 125% of the list?
That 125% rule is in section 180. So I think we'd have to look at the rules that do apply to Estacada to see if there's any sort of percentage in there at all. I don't know if there is or not.
I don't think there ever was one in the past, so I'm betting there's not.
So does that mean we don't need that section? We can just put all the.
No, you're still limited to the financial forecast. So no, you can't load it up. The part it seems that we're free of is the need to adopt your TSP constantly and not be able to build something that's not on your financial constraint list. That's great. But yeah, you are still limited by the forecast.
I have a question. In the category of safety versus like on A46, 6th Avenue and North Broadway Street, for add a stop sign or a flashing beacon at the east leg of the intersection. Kids come across there, elderly. It's classified A46 and it's under financially constrained project list. Would that fall under safety improvements when you got people crossing a street? That's more like, especially kids. I mean, you've got an intersection there where they're coming to big gyms and they're going to Granny's. They run to beat the traffic. I mean, Sherry and I have sat out there and watched this happen. It just, you know, we're eating something from Granny's, but you know, it's just like, but it's just a flow, you know, and it seems like that would fall under safety as opposed to flow of traffic moments. I understand there's a delay. We took a video of school down on the Clackamas River down there, where they have the push button thing. You've got a flow of traffic, solar powered, hit the button, lights up really nice. Everybody stops, go across, wheelchair, whatever. It's done. Flow of traffic comes back. It says 30 grand for that. I don't know the budget on actually what it would cost for two of those, one on each side of the street. But kids and wheelchairs, elderly, somebody's got to look out for them. Seems like that would fall under safety.
Yeah, admittedly, some of these projects could be categorized under multiple lists. I think that one I think is under the Safe Routes to School list. I think the reason why is that originally came up as a recommendation through the Safe Routes to School action plan that the city did. It was around the same time we were doing the active transportation plans. It was a few years ago. So that was a carryover from specifically Safe Routes to School work. But yeah, it's definitely safety related.
Okay.
But I see your point too, and it comes back to the intersection improvement conversation. As if you were to go to Broadway and Sixth Street at 3:30 afternoon, you would see traffic backed up from that intersection all the way back to the elementary school and beyond. And turning left and turning right is a very difficult strategy as everyone's moving in that direction, let alone the people who are going back and forth to big gyms during that time. And so, again, I'm learning that intersections aren't necessarily a part of this, but I mean, that's another issue that definitely exists. And if it's a stop sign, if it's something needs to occur there to regulate traffic for sure. It's one of the things that keeps our school district up at night too, is that specific crosswalk, which is off district property.
Just
And I was just gonna know, I mean, reclassifying or categorizing that as safety doesn't really change anything from the implementable standpoint. And currently that project, it's a high priority project, but it's also on the financially constrained list. So I think it's presumed that is a very high priority, and that's something that you guys would want to move on sooner than later.
Just to clarify on page 71, the connectivity and capacity, 7 of the projects are specifically intersections. That's all they are.
Yeah.
So maybe I misunderstood what you were saying about.
I'm just perplexed, honestly. Like the thing that just kind of gets me is that I see at least 10 pages of what the standard street should look like. And so I would assume with all of the algorithms and mathematics and data that goes into this, that I would see an equal 8 or 9 pages that shows what constitutes an intersection between major and minor and neighborhood street and controlled neighborhood street. Because there's a lot of detail in what a road looks like, but not a lot of detail in what an intersection should look like. That's my point.
Do we have that particular intersection listed as an intersection improvement, or is it just stop signs and flashing lights? Because intersection improvement to me would mean we would need to do some sort of study to figure out the best flow of traffic there, as opposed to safety for the kids, which is important as well too. But what gets kids through safely and cars through timely?
Right.
No, I think that one's just stop signs and some flashing beacon of some sort. As far as I know, there's no need to change anything geometrically, that intersection. That intersection, and just maybe going way back, if you remember, actually, there might be a table in the back of this in the outcome section. Again, referring to some of these projects are very multi-purpose, where that's safe routes to school safety. It could probably fit a lot of categories. That intersection was one, yeah, if you look on page 100, there's a table with a bunch of numbers. But that was showing where we were showing how much congestion we were projecting at different intersections around the city. And that one in particular, if we don't do anything, it was projected to be pretty congested. Changing that to an all-way stop helped it quite a bit. So it does both. Now, obviously, if you don't have to stop on 6 today and you put in stop signs, it's not going to be as good for people on 6, but it is going to balance the delay around, and overall it will be better. So again, it's a kind of a very multi-purpose project.
Or as a group, are we satisfied with that? Yeah. Okay, because it seems to me, building off of that too, that if we're going to put in stop signs, we're going to try to understand the flow of traffic there too. Is that right? I think we should be doing that, if I remember right, from the changes that we made on Shafford. Just double checking the flow.
I assume that was done though in the creation of this plan, was the study of the flow of traffic, was it not?
It was, yeah, but it was based on our 20-year projection. So I think we did
Right.
have some near-term traffic counts. We forecasted out with 20 years of growth. So it was,
Yeah.
the analysis we did was based on that.
Yeah.
It's not the ideal. I'm concerned about the spacing.
Agreed.
You know, the buses.
Can you talk into the mic? Sorry, Denise.
I can hear you.
The buses, you know, because there's only that one block. So then you have a 4-way stop, which is good because it's keeping the traffic slower, I think. But then you have all the turning left, and then are the buses, are they actually not going to be pull out for a little? I don't know. It's just,
Yeah.
It would be better if there was a longer block
Yeah.
there.
No, I agree with
Um,
that. And the log jam though of not having the stop there, it
It
goes all the
goes
way
back
back.
there.
And so our local, very intuitive drivers then come out where the laundromat is.
Yes.
And take the shortcut, or it's not a shortcut, but take a different path
Mhm.
to get to Broadway, which still leaves the log jam.
Right.
Because it's all
Right.
coming this way. And so, yeah,
I
that's
mean,
just
it's
the
good.
geographics
This is
of.
what we can do. It's
Yeah.
gonna make it better, but
Right.
there's still gonna be issues, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Going back to other conversation that we had about Copeland, Lawrence Road. I know we've got proposed changes to those roads being major collectors, but did we settle on anything for, I think I would call it an intersection improvement to that area too? Is that something that we feel needs to happen more in the short term or interim term as opposed to when some development comes in?
What would be involved, excuse me, what would be involved in adding an intersection improvement project at that intersection at this point in the process?
Pretty much just that. We just had a project.
We wouldn't have to do any extra analysis or,
No, because I think my guess is the project you need, it's really just fixing the geometrics so you can turn school buses there. I don't think we need to analyze it to see if we need a traffic signal or how many lanes you need. My guess is it's as simple as it's an intersection of two rural streets and it's got urban traffic and you need to just be able to make that turn with a larger vehicle. So again, I think it's probably something that would have gotten fixed if you did the projects that are in there to just urbanize the two streets, but who knows when that's going to happen. So breaking a piece off to move that forward might be a better approach.
Yeah, and so if that did get included on the list and the streets don't get urbanized anytime soon, but a funding opportunity came up and we were able to say, hey, we have this project in our TSP, can we use the funding for it? That might allow the intersection to get improved sooner than the rest of the streets do. If I understand that.
If that's
correctly.
entirely,
Minimally that corner. Yeah.
Right.
if that's entirely in county property and there's no city property touching it, can we do something in the TSP that's outside of our city?
That side of the intersection is inside the urban growth boundary. So that is within our planning authority. We're required to plan for all of the areas within our UGB. So we can put it in our plan. But we would have to coordinate with Clackamas County to be permitted to build it. If we did manage to fund it at some point.
Okay.
I'd be so disappointed if we had this great solution that and found the funding for it and they somehow said no. And we are doing this project in coordination with Clackamas County. I don't think our representative is on the call today, but we're asking them to look at everything that's in this plan and let us know if it conflicts with what's in their plans and their standards. But yeah, it is not entirely within our control until it comes into city limits.
Okay.
And I don't know the breadth of the problem, but I mean, if it's damaging the existing infrastructure, like I think I heard you say culverts getting damaged, it may be in their interest to do something there. And maybe it's just an interim. It might not be the urban standard, but they could still maybe just widen the pavement out that corner.
Recently, there was a vehicle that broke the culvert. And whether, whatever the circumstance was.
It was not a yellow bus though.
No, it wasn't.
All right.
Uh,
Note that.
No, but the culvert is broken because of the sharp right turn there. So just saying, somebody went in the ditch, part of their car was left there, so they didn't clean up their mess. Probably a shock to them, drop down in the.
For the sake of time management, I'll go forward to the next slide. I think I've only got a couple left. But I did just want to touch on the last bullet point on the agenda here was as you're continuing to look through this in your review, just kind of some recommendations if you're intimidated by the 100+ pages, or you're limited on time like most people are, you want to know where should you focus. As a reminder, sections 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8, I said are implementable in quotes. I guess that's what I'm thinking. Like, for example, if you're a planning commissioner, city council, or someone that's going to have to implement this TSP and use it, those are the sections where I guess the meat of that is going to be. A lot of the rest of it is setting some context, but really that's where the rubber meets the road, is in those sections. So something you may want to keep in mind is, if you look through that as someone that has to implement, kind of going back to some of the questions earlier about the cross sections and how you make that decision. Do you have enough direction, right? Is there enough teeth there? Do you need something to be more specific? That would be something to think about. The functional classification map in figure 12. Again, I know we did some adjustments on those, but confirming just where the street locations are, and we have the appropriate functional classifications assigned. And of course, there was the table, I think, right after that, where we noted where we had changed functional classifications from the last TSP. So just always a good check to make sure we're comfortable there before we go forward. And then the typical cross sections, because I know there was a fair amount of discussion and adjusting on a number of those. Some of it we had some more discussion here, but just the major collector, the minors, the local streets, and the neighborhood locals, which are the new ones, because all those special cross sections, well, almost all of them, those were already adopted. Actually, those are carryovers from the active transportation plan. So not that you can't comment on any of them, but I would definitely, make sure that you're comfortable with the major collector, minor collector, local street, and neighborhood locals, which are new changes. And I think that was it. I'm going to go to the next slide. Let me check myself here. Nope, there's more. Project lists. There's a lot to go through. But again, it's just always a good check. Is there something that you wanted to see in the TSP that we didn't get in there? Maybe we missed it. Maybe it didn't come up before. An example could be this project we're talking about adding at the corner of Copeland and Lawrence. And I said the project lists are limited by funding, so we can put more in there. The high priority project list, tables 12 through 20. Do you think there's anything we should have on there? It should be recognized as a high priority, and we didn't. The financial constrained project list, again, as we mentioned, I don't know the question about what projects should be added to use the remaining $615,000, because that part doesn't sound like it applies anymore. But just do we have the right mix of projects? Again, correcting myself from earlier, you are not restricted to only building those projects first. You can build something else if the opportunity comes up. If a different source of funding comes up, you can do it. But that's probably the biggest way those projects are going to come into play from what I've seen in the past. It's going to be if a developer wants to do his own change or comp plan amendment, and they have to do their long range forecast to see if they're going to have to contribute to any further transportation improvements because the TSP didn't account on that land use. They get to assume that all these projects are in place because there's a commitment to fund them. That's largely the only time I've ever seen that financial constraint list. I guess I don't want to say really matter. I don't want to make it sound like it doesn't matter. But that's where it's got really its most utility. So you can keep that in mind. And then the strategy section, as I mentioned before, do look through those. And as I said before, a lot of times we had softer language, should do these things, consider do these things. It's not really helpful in a TSP because you need to know what to do or not to do. So we made that more specific, said the city will do these things. And it might be we'll explore further, but we at least made it give more clear direction. I wanted to make sure nobody missed those little changes. So I put them all in boxes. Just like those two up on the screen. So hopefully you don't miss them. You can just go right to the boxes. Make sure you're comfortable with what we're recommending in there. That would definitely be something I would check on and not miss. And I think that was my last slide. All right. Any comments on there on anything? Before, yes.
We have, we have ADA ramps in town and a lot of your standards are 6-foot sidewalks. And so when a contractor comes in, they're gonna go build out sidewalks, they go to our public works drawings and they have a diagram to go by and it's a 5-foot sidewalk. Is it something that our engineers have to go back and redo those drawings based on the 6-foot, or is it something you guys have for that? Does that make sense?
I mean,
If we're changing the standard to a 6-foot sidewalk for whatever collector it is, we don't have any of those standard construction drawings at this point. And say the council implements this, how do we go about getting those standard construction drawings to give to the contractors so they don't keep putting down 5-foot sidewalks?
Would those come from Kurt's, from our city engineer?
Yeah, we don't do new standard construction drawings as part of this project. And I don't know if part of your question also gets to, I don't want to call it the retrofit issue. Like if you're just going in to do some repair on existing 5-foot sidewalk, you can't go back and put in 6 feet because that's new standard because it's not going to match what's there. So for some of those like ADA improvements, if you're only doing corners, right, it still has to match what's there. So you might not really be able to do the 6, but where you could going forward, you would need to come up with new drawings. Anything else? As I look behind me, I realized I might have more time than I thought because unless there are public people online, actually, I don't know. There's the public comment period I was going to open up if there are no more questions.
Other comments, questions? Yeah, you can keep that. Comments, questions, additional feedback from the group?
Denise has a question.
Okay.
Sorry. So some of these things that are in here, there's gonna be like standards we need and that type of thing. So is there gonna be a bunch of code changes that the council will need to adopt to go along with these? And we just aren't seeing those here yet today, right?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think those might be on the website. I think they were shared with
Okay.
you previously. They were drafted back when we did the alternatives memo. So this was a
Okay.
while ago.
Yeah. Okay, so they haven't really changed from that.
Haven't touched them
Okay.
since then.
Okay.
One thing I do need to check with MIG, who's handling those, is if in the strategy section, right, some of the statements we're making out, the more policy statements, if we need to adjust anything based
Okay.
on that. But other
Okay.
than that, they haven't changed.
Okay, thank you.
That memo was called the Regulatory Solutions Memo. And it is on the project website, webpage, in addition to all of the other memos that will be compiled into volume 2. Yep.
Yeah.
So if we come up with anything from here on out, we would send it, I'm guessing, to Taylor and Alan. Over
Yes.
there. And
Yeah.
then the next steps, this is it for this group, right? But then next steps for the project.
Next steps for the project, where's my PowerPoint?
Oh, sorry.
There we go. So what was it, Monday, right? The 23rd, we've got our Planning Commission City Council briefing. So it's similar to this. It's kind of our last check-in with them, overview of what's changed since we talked to them last time. Hopefully, vetting any issues or at least hearing what they want to see change or concerned about before we go through the public hearings to give us a chance to hit the target the first time and not hit any bumps through that. And then we're scheduled for Planning Commission on the 15th of November. We have some tentative dates for subsequent hearings, but depends on if hearings get continued or not. So we'll see, but we're hoping to be done and adopted. The latest should be in January, I would think. It kind of depends on, like I said, how we can hit certain meetings and the holidays, but great. That's the thought. And what I didn't think of, Taylor, was a date by which we need to tell everyone to get us further comments. End of next week. I'm just
Ideally, before, it would be great to have all of that at least by the same date that we have the council and planning commission briefing, which is October 23rd. So, which is Monday. So, that would be ideal. Sooner is always better. But even if they trickle in after that, that's okay. We will just, any changes that get made between that council briefing and that first public hearing with the planning commission on November 15th, we'll call out, of course, in the presentation. So, and, we're documenting the comments that we received too. So it'll be a big packet, but all of that input will be captured. So ideally, any additional comments and questions, get it to us by Monday, the 23rd.
Unless you got more for me, I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Good. Hopefully you're comfortable with where it's at. It's looking good. Like I said, if something comes up, we'll certainly respond.
Thanks, and definitely appreciate everyone's involvement in this too. Very helpful.
Yes, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And hope to see you at the public hearings. Hopefully in support and telling the Planning Commission, City Council that you're happy with the product. Can always use more votes of support. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.